Senator Volker.
Mr. President, you're welcome. Mr. President, it is interesting that in reading the resolution, and let me explain to you why the resolution is not a little longer. We called NBC News and we asked them to send us material, even though, of course, we knew a great deal about Tim, and they sent us reams of material. And I understand the Assembly has, as of this afternoon, had not yet composed a resolution because I guess they were putting so much into it, but we decided that we would do the resolution today. I believe they're doing an honorarium today in Washington, if I'm not mistaken. I have been told that the actual funeral is going to be a private funeral fitting in Buffalo. But when I read the resolution, there's one thing that was not in here. Although, yeah, Tim did work for Governor Cuomo, he came here from South Buffalo to the Assembly. And that's where I first met Tim because he worked for Vince Graber. Vince, a close personal friend. You get close to somebody when you defeat him one time and lose the next. And Tim became a good friend of mine. In fact, I remember him coming to me, this chubby, kind of chubby-faced fellow from South Buffalo, who struck you immediately as an affable, very capable person. He loved Albany, by the way. It's a little hard to believe, but he did, because he loved the political game. Of course, he loved Washington more. When he was here, he worked for Vince Graber, did legislation and public relations for him. And then, of course, when Mario Cuomo became governor, it was quickly that he noticed that this was a person who was headed for greatness. And he was a Democrat, there's no question. But despite that fact, and maybe that's partly because my wife was a Democrat, I understand the feelings of those people, especially those people that come out of what I call mill towns like Buffalo. His father, who he called Big Russ in his book, I've met him a number of times, wonderful person. His wife is a pleasure. And I think a lot of us saw Luke, who is the son, who appears to me to be a chip off the old block, on television. It's hard to speak too much about Tim because so much was shown on television during the last weekend. My son, Mark, was absolutely crushed because he and his wife, Elisa, were such huge fans of Meet the Press and always felt, and I think Buffalonians, when there's a person who seems to represent the values that we believe that we in Buffalo represent, you cling to that. And I don't care what political party he is or what views he carries. Tim Russert was a tough negotiator, but he was even more so a tough interviewer. I watched some of the interviews, and by the way, those interviews were with Republicans, Democrats, all sorts of people. He didn't discriminate against anybody. His job was to be a reporter, and an investigative reporter, you could say that, a person to get out what he thought were the facts, and he did. He came to Albany here a number of times later, and I spoke with him here about his family, about the early days, and his love also, by the way, for Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a very interesting fellow. And he was, well, a little more liberal than some of us upstate, but if you knew him and dealt with him, and I dealt with him a lot, he was a warm man who Tim Russert would gravitate to because that was Tim Russert. He was very much like Daniel Patrick Moynihan. He never, that I ever saw, put on any airs. He could walk into a building, and sometimes people at first didn't recognize him, and he was hobnobbing, and they suddenly realized they were with a famous person. And he was just the same in the halls of Washington, in the back room here in Albany, or in a South Buffalo church, or as Senator Bruno said at St. Rose, where I think he gave the speech at a graduation, I believe, or something. He was a great man. He was Jesuit taught like myself, except that he went to John Carroll, and of course I went to Canisius. Had some very close personal friends who taught him. In fact, one particular priest who he called every year on a priest's birthday. And here's a man who was probably one of the busiest men in America, and would call one of his teachers, a priest, every year, and take the time to do that. He was a gentleman. He was bright. He was a very major part of the Western New York community. We were always proud of him. He was always proud of the Buffalo Bills, the Sabres, which are intertwined in our community. He was not, by the way, anybody who ever talked negatively about anyone, but particularly he never talked negative about Western New York. Of course, we're offering co-sponsorship to everybody in the Senate, and I have a feeling nobody's going to turn it down. But I have to finish by saying, I admit that I watched Meet the Press with Tim when I didn't watch a lot of other programs. Not because he was a Buffalonian or because he was from New York, but because he was enjoyable to watch and listen to. And he was a man of character, strength, and I have no doubt that he's already been welcomed into heaven by the great God who put us here and will decide when we leave. Goodbye to Tim Russert, and I wish his family better times in the future.